Et voilà.
Back at the Social Environmental Economic Council with the Marjorie Big Ten Paris 2012. This is the hashtag Big Ten Paris on the social networks. Second panel of the day, a large-size topic. 4. Data, personal data, new data, valuable data, threatened sometimes. How can we protect these personal e-data? What about the regulatory framework, which we would have on many digital topics? But here, this is a real polemics. To launch panel 2, we're going to have the example on open data. It's Home and Go, the web service that simplifies the search for housing accommodation. Margot Pelenchi is the co-founder of Home and Go.
Bonjour Margot.
Bonjour. Bonjour. Bonjour.
Big Ten.
Big Ten Paris. Good morning, each and everyone. Before we start this explanation on Home and Go, I'd like to show a small video so that you know better our challenges.
Donc cette vidéo, c'est en fait
OpenStreetMap Wikipedia data. Each flashlight corresponds to data production by an individual using his phone to generate data. What we are going to present today is the example of real estate for accommodation purposes, how to go for an accommodation in a given segment based on data. Let me take you one example. This is like storytelling. You have a couple. They wanted to find an apartment back in 2007, Dominique and Paris. So they moved out because Dominique was transferred to Paris, and they wanted to have information on schools around. They had 2 children at that time. They spent quite a long time aggregating the data they had, understanding, in fact, the ads, real estate ads, meeting their expectations. But in 2007, the ideal good was only the summation of criteria, individual criteria. This is of the past. This is why I'm here today. That's their son, Theo. Theo, if I graduated in June, is going to live in Lyon in a couple of months. So he wishes to go to a number of internet sites to find ads, but he would like to know where the good is located. He doesn't know the city. He's going to use the data to exemplify the data. He wants to find an apartment. He wants to be close to the university, supermarkets, but also he wishes to have good mass transportation system. Takes his computer. So he goes to Home and Go to satisfy his expectations. 1 million ads we have today, Home and Go. The smarter that each individual site can be. So what can Theo do with Home and Go? So he centralizes all the ads and places them on one single format. Then he can textualize each of the ad to see for each of them. If he finds one, Place Bellecour, downtown, that is close to the metro, they have a shopping mall, a couple of minutes from his university, walking distance, so this satisfies his needs. But he can also record and save all the data on his own computer and communicate with his mother who's in Paris, and he can send a couple of ads on her own. So you see, public data supplements private requirements. Public data Let me explain. Public data means open data very often. Open data are data that are open and public. They're made available to each and everyone, journalists, firms, companies like us, students, so that we can create value, us as company. But open data also means asking communities, companies to open their own data so they can be reused and made available to each and everyone. We are changing paradigm here because a database, which is proprietary, it's an asset, progressively will be redisseminated to really generate information. So we're not leaving at that. Within a couple of years, his sister, this is 2012, has data, and data has become a decision-making process, a contextualization data. Leia, the small sister, she has to move out. But the change will be radical because data will mean the possibility to have hyper-personalization, hyper-customization of the data, and data will come to her, will be pushed to her. She'll be staying with another student. She likes to listen to rock. She likes to go to the park. She has a lot of energy. She wants to do sports. And she wants to pay the price of the market, which is not only the price of past trade that are updated. No, it takes it's an algorithm that really takes the trends of the market and updates it to a real price. She'll have a rate of affinity between ads and what she wants. And this she can do with her mobile phone, smartphone. May sound a bit ambitious, but even 5 years ago we had no such smartphones. So you see, put things in perspective for the future. At the end of the day, we have private data on the left, open data on the right, and the value is a synergy between the two. In fact, the data she wishes to have is the one that corresponds to her, that is pushed to her. One step further, you might say that it's something she already has. There is a matching on Amazon. Amazon knows better than you do what you like to read. So based on the works you have been ordering or bought, and on the data that is made anonymous, obviously, for other people, on the site, she comes with personal options. You could do the same thing with apartments. One step further, you could say, using data for a periodic report, which might be scary sometimes, could be reversed, because brands can create data. So one initiative started in the UK, which is called My Data, Mes Infos in French, reversing that paradigm. In other terms, if you're a company, you have data, you can make them available to your customers, give them back, who will be in a better position to understand how they're going to use them. Use my service and take informed decision. This is the data of the future. When you look at data producers, they have evolved. We're discussing collectivities, we're discussing the state, we're discussing brands. And one step further, we could say those pigeons will give you information on what we see in the future. You know, you have them everywhere in Paris, for better or for worse, so they could bring value for real-time information. You see, the watch time developed by the French Electricity Board creates value on energy produced by your own home. Your smart consumption on data production, which is specific to your home. And the source of creation will be the smartphone and the various versions to produce this info. Okay, to sum it up, in 2017, the data will be a source of offers and inspiration, reflecting who you are so that we can best support you. There is a small video to round it off. The data game released are like pieces of glass that are no longer used or usable. You have a bit of glass and maybe it cuts, but that's all. The interest will be to piece up all these bits of glass so that it can go back to what the glass represents. This is the data for the years to come. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, Margot Pellin. Marjorie, I believe we loved that example of the pigeons. Which pigeon did we see? Depending on the color, others the entrepreneurs, others the real pigeons. And Leah 2017, I believe Theo's sister will certainly find another student to live with her. Stay with us, please. This is a discussion on e-data, personal data, the core business, and we have other guests. Yes, we have a woman who's done a lot of graduate HEC. She's a counselor of state. She chaired the Interministerial Council on Internet. She is the general delegate of Forum on Internet. She's a member of the National Commission on Independence and Liberty. Isabelle FALQUE-PIERROTIN. So, Isabelle FALQUE-PIERROTIN. Then we have François MOMBOISSE. He was chairman of FEVAD. He had an MBA and started with Procter & Gamble. He became general director of FNAC, FNAC Music, development of FNAC.com. François MOMBOISSE, e-commerce data protection. You are welcome. And then we have a newcomer. Unfortunately, Jacques Bouguin could not make it with us. He is trapped not by the data, but by the Thalys train. So we have a last-minute guest. We're very, very happy to have a young man who created a startup in Silicon Valley. He sold it. He's in charge of innovation at Etalab. Etalab is the government mission on the opening of public data. Welcome to Romain. So, could we start with you, Romain LACOMBE? Home and go, that example. Could you tell us the interest of what data, open data represent? That's your field of expertise. It's more than a trend. It has become like a shower of data. It's a shower of data. And if you like, at 5 or 10 years to come, this is a curve that represents the amount of data we currently generate, that in fact companies are using to operate, government administrations are also producing them. Well, this is an exponential way up. Every 9 to 11 months, we are doubling the amount of data, the quality of data. So changing in nature as to how we use them. So we can really say, yes, this number of data, and the first applications, mind you, in the field of democracy, public action, because in fact, this is what I'm in charge of. This is what represents open data. As Margot rightly said, it's the idea of having, or the government and communities having made available to all the operators in the public remit, funding the data collection, information collection for their mission, obviously enough each one to draw the benefits of this data. So the question of transparency and access to public information means something we've had in France since 1978, same year as the law on personal data, by the way. So you see quite a while, 78. And the new internet usage make, in fact, this open data system essential. We have access to information. Citizens are informed much more quickly. Mobility, social networks, online press. So you see, information reporting to the citizen is part of the new system of governance that governments must make available at the local, national, and international level. Also, it's this idea that these data are an instrument, a tool, fueling the digital economy. I know that this notion will come back. Data is something proteform. You may have personal data. We're all producing our own data, even on taking photo with posting them on the social network, but also public data, the one I'm in charge of, which in fact generate an incredible number of information as to the environment in which citizens, data associations live. And there are tools to generate new services, innovative services quite often, as an economic information I was referred to this morning. You might think civic, social role of innovation, this new usage, which, by the way, the state would not have thought about, or would not have had the means to organize, if made open, if made available in format that enable each and everyone to use them, then they will give the developers, give the individuals who can handle the data, the ways and means to invent new services. This is important. And I'll revert to Etalab and what we do. Yes, let's first go around the... And one of the major trends is that idea of supporting innovation from the data. One of the best examples in France is Home & Go, which Margot just presented. It's a beautiful summary of what we can do in terms of information access in generating useful services to build the digital revolution. A lot of topics that have been mentioned with you. We'll take them up one by one. You're right in saying we're going to discuss metaphors to illustrate that new market of data and fueling the data for economy. François MOMBOISSE, FEVAD, you see this under which approach? Data are a fuel of a new economy or something new? It's the fuel for the trade sector, the merchant sector. In the shops, you can collect a lot of data as to the individual taste of customers, and this data are used to come with a number of services that will meet the customer's needs. What you should on Amazon is exactly what a bookkeeper will do. You buy a book, and if the bookkeeper does his job correctly, he will ask you, did you like the book? Depending on the answer, he will counsel you. Well, in the shops, they do the same thing. Based on what you bought, on the pages you went through. In a bookshop, you can stay one hour in front of a detective book or whatever. So they will know in the shops what you've done. So next time around, you will be presented the same thing. Isabelle FALQUE-PIERROTIN. What's the approach CNIL has taken on this explosion of data? Are you differentiating between the various types of data? Well, CNIL said, yes, given that we face an environment that has totally changed over the last 5 years, e-commerce or commerce comes from an individual choice. And now, in terms of quantity, in terms of capacity for processing data, we've reached unbelievable levels. For the regulator, it's a new universe. It's something we have to reinvent. And the job of the regulator is totally different, to take the new needs into account. As François rightly said, when data fuel this new business, this new economy, you must incorporate this data to help, to support the new needs. Protecting, but supporting, helping. Hence, for the regulator, a change of job. And I would even say that the purpose is to really understand how these personal data are used, can be used, and how far change can go. So this is my very first reaction. Let's adjust to this new universe. If you allow me on fueling this data in terms of regulation, too much regulation, will that not kill, the reservoir of data, the fueling of data? No, I can tell you no. But what do we see? We see in that digital environment a fear of the way this data might be used in excess. So if we fix limits, it also means strengthening the confidence a shopkeeper or anyone can have with his customer. I believe it goes even further than that, because the moment personal data are at the core of an economic model, it's no longer a constraint that we should manage. It is really including personal data in innovation, building a sustainable innovation. You mentioned a couple of examples. There are so many others. The car of the future will be a connected car. Suppose we are using the cars and we have the feeling that the cars, after all, are nothing but a heavy tank. You can someone could communicate what we have, our address, where we are. So people will mistrust or distrust this on-board progress in the cars. So I, for one, am convinced that data protection, personal data protection, can be a competitive edge for the customer, strengthening confidence. And two, if you wish collectively to build that sustainable trust, not just a one-shot trust, sustainable time-wise, then you must provide the necessary guarantees. And it's a proper investment, after all, that individual data protection. It's a good investment. So trust is one of the key words when discussing that revolution, saying in the last 5 years. This is what we had. I heard François MOMBOISSE said, big data. Big brother? Would that not be the case of generating an excessive distrust so that we might feel we want to regulate or over-regulate?
I think the big data, it's a different universe altogether. What difference would you make? What is big data? It's the capacity to store data. You have both traditional data and new types of data, and using these two types of data, you can generate new services. So it's very important as a vehicle of economic innovation. But for regulators, it changes the situation dramatically, because so far, regulation was done on the basis of the collection of data. In other words, you would collect data towards a particular end and purpose. And you would regulate those people who were collecting the data. With big data, things changing dramatically, because the data is everywhere. It moves around. Another new feature is that you're going to use data in order to provide new types of services. So as regulators, we're trying and see what we have to adapt, what we have to adjust in order to adapt to this universe. What you want to do is not regulate collection of data, but in order to regulate the way in which data is used rather than collected. And this is the first sea change. Second, in the big data universe, one cannot rely on the end user. Let me give you one example. Increasingly, regulation when it comes to internet is on the end user. You tell people, why don't you install an antivirus, use a parental control software. You want to get rid of pornographic. So you have to adjust your browser if you don't want your data to be attacked. So it works up to a point. But, we are the users. At some point, the users will end up saying, is it my role? Is it for me to do this work? It's a huge work on my shoulders. There's so much data around in big data that this question has become a crucial one. In fact, you have to re-educate the audience. You can rely on them. You can trust them. Yes, you can trust people up to a point. You can trust them. Of course you can. I was one of the first ones to advocate digital education. But when it comes to changing a system, or switching to a system where the whole of regulation is on the end user's shoulders, is pretty unbalanced as a regulating system. Most of us do not read the warnings, the confidentiality notices. They end up being extremely complicated. So, of course, you have to do more in terms of education of the public, but it's not enough. At the same time, you have to realize that this new universe, the big data, with so much data information moving on, what is the role and the responsibility of a professional actors, players, and so far we don't know. Well, you are an internet surfer, you are in front of your display. Oh, Microsoft is fully aware of this. After 3 opt-ins, that the users don't even click on it, and the opt-in is supposed to step in to prevent the cookie. So, in fact, what we are doing is increasing the complexity of regulation in order to be better regulated. So is it not quite an issue? It's kind of a Uber-esque situation. So would you say that regulation, or this type of regulation, is it really effective? Do you think it can work? Well, opting in is a European decision. It's not just France Télécom. You know, there were many exchanges, discussions between European countries and the European Parliament. Well, what is opt-in? Well, opt-in means that one asks the user the authorization to put a cookie on his or her computer. You can be for it, you can be against him. That's what the law says. How can you make sure that this law doesn't become absurd when it comes to implementing it? And we talked to the advertising industry and asked them, is it possible, while complying with the European legislation, we have to be realistic at the same time. We're not supposed to ask for an opt-in at every single time. It's complicated. You can't really restrict surfing too much. I do hope that, following up on the British initiative, we end up having a reasonable policy in France. What would it be? We're working on it, François. François would agree with me, I'm sure. I think we're almost there. We'd have a system that would be accepted by professional people and in compliance with the European legislation, would come up with a European standard. So within a legal framework, you could use practices that facilitate innovation, but at the same time, the web surfer would have adequate control of. Well, could you tell us more? No, it's too early to tell. It's not published yet. It's not official. So you're not allowed to ask these questions. So the bookshop, suppose someone tells the bookshop, I forbid you to remember that I bought a certain book from your shop. Sometimes I think that this precaution is excessive just because it's on the internet, it's in the digital field. Things that wouldn't be allowed in the concrete world. It's kind of schizophrenia. People are afraid of Big Brother, but when you call on your telecom operator and he asks you about the nature of your subscription and your problem, you're tempted to tell him, no, you're supposed to know. No, he can't know because it's a separate system. So do you do too much in terms of regulation? Are we being excessive? In terms of precautionary principle, yes. Perhaps we are extra careful. At the time when you collect the data, you're supposed to tell which use you want to make of them, but things are going so fast that eventually you end up doing things with the data that was not expected, wasn't even feasible 5 years ago. Geolocation was impossible a few years back. Talking about all data, impossible at the time to anticipate the use that would be made of this data. This is why it's so regulation is so tricky at European level. You know, things change very fast, technically speaking, while legislation, crafting a directive takes about 15 years. So you work on the raw data, raw material, that's data. Would you say that French regulatory framework is adapted? Do you have problem with it? Can you find solutions, or are you supposed to give in on some products because they don't comply with the regulation? What about differences between various European countries in Europe? No. Of course, we make our statement, we report what we are doing to the authorities. We think in terms of users, essentially. We use data and we transform data into information because we want to provide the best possible service to the end users in terms of gain of time. Opting-in, for us, the equivalent of opting-in would be obliging a user to filling or to meet the same criteria in 10 different sites. This is exactly what you do. When you look for an apartment, you use many different portals, many different sources, re-entering the same criteria, the floor age, the profile. When Home and Go, we centralize it all, and we do it once for all. We enter your wish list once and for all. And then we are very careful when it comes to the information we collect from the people who are looking for an apartment. Well, we customize the research experience as much. Suppose you're looking for a 3-room apartment. It implies that either you have a child, a couple with a child, or you are a co-location, co-tenant. Two different situations. In the first case, you need to have a creche nearby with the services for your child. In the other situation, you want to be able to have to go out at night. This is the case of students. So in the first case, you want to live in a young, trendy district. And sometimes when you are in the town, in the city for the first time, you don't know where those districts are. So of course, this temptation, this envy that you have to need to collect more and more data. But at the same time, you don't want to be excessive, so you have to find the golden means, as it were. I agree with you. You have to find the right balance. Don't forget that the uses made of different types of data vary greatly. When you refer to personal data, of course, you want to protect personal, confidential privacy of the users. You know, these consumption patterns, things or data that might be used in order to improve a service, but at the same time, you want to avoid too much control. I'd like to refer to open data, public type of data. It's a very different profile, different type of information. These information or data do not concern individuals, although there are exceptions. Typically, these data are statistical data or data concerning policies or geographical data, but these data are collected by the community or by local or central government. And that's where you have to draw the line in terms of regulation. Different types of requirements. You referred to transparency and trust at the same time. In previous panel, someone referred to the necessary trust that the French population expects from the rest of the public and the government and society as a whole. So the transparency issue is key. If you want to solve these problems, if you want to build up trust, in a nutshell, let's say that 80% French people see the glass of half full, and is the opposite in other European countries. So we want to achieve as much transparency as possible. But then the regulation of public data, in order to get the most social, economic, and civic benefits from the policy should go for the encourage the use and reuse of similar data. So, discussing public data, I'm referring to the recent change in the open data policy. You may be aware that the General Secretariat for the Modernization of Public Action is very broad service, very broad department, very broad framework, as announced by the government. You need to be able to encourage innovation from the use of public data by enhancing the principle of free for all, the free use of public data, free of charge. All government departments have encouraged this mission and this purpose, putting data online in a way, in format that allows for their use by the general public or private businesses like Home and Go. So you reported the ministry, and I suppose they encourage this new trend. Now, what about an a priori regulation? Don't you think that the risk of blocking innovation for private businesses? In other words, you refer to the necessary trust to be established between users and business. What about the necessary trust between regulators and the public? On this idea whereby there will be some kind of a separation between personal data and public data, I wish I could believe you, but I am afraid it's not the case. Let me give you one example. We have a number of data on criminality or crime rate, which seems to be public data. Well, some data can become extremely fine in terms of very sophisticated, very detailed, go down to the level of a street. Particularly in the UK, they've tested the system, and eventually you are in a position to re-identify the individual or the group of individuals that you're referring to. You know exactly who they are. So that's one example. Let me use another example on civil registries. You know that civil registries in France are online. They have been placed online by municipalities, you know, on a kind of a piecemeal basis. Each one used their own approach. And what did we see? Well, we saw that people learned via the online registries where detail was given as to their birth place or the way from whom they were born. All this was available to the general public. So, both in terms of the degree of details of public data, there may be, I'm not saying it's always the case, you might see a risk, a challenge to the privacy of personal data. So what we are saying is a huge step forward for democracy. Nobody can oppose this trend towards more transparency, more democratization, and even the public service facilitated by the use of a public data. But let's be very careful, because these are maybe sensitive data. So you need to put up a framework for the condition in which this data are used with the permit or licensing system, so that we don't end up in a situation we say, what have we done? I think you're quite right to say that this is a very tricky issue. I should have made it clear that Etalab has been working with CNIL to make sure that these issues were taken on board. Concerning the two examples we've selected so far, I'd like to say that France doesn't put this kind of data online. I hope that people who are listening to us are not concerned. Open data doesn't mean that we put personal data online. On the contrary, coming to my two examples, we need to check whether personal data were public data could end up as public data. Sometimes in some countries, public authorities or public officials get information or are supposed to give information concerning their resume or their career paths. So in France, a personal data privacy is protected by CNIL, but also by a specific piece of legislation on statistical data. So the relevance of data is a complex issue. So when we decided that we would put a tax information online, these data is generated by the French Finance Ministry. It's concerning the wealth tax. We could only do it for a small number of municipalities, because we thought that for other municipalities, some people who would have access to the list of people who pay the wealth tax would object to this. So you have to put up a framework for this. Now there's a law, a French law of 51, that specifies the number of people you can put in a group is the concern over anonymity. As Margot said, things are moving so fast. We didn't have smartphones 5 years back. So what can we anticipate for within 5 years? So what public authorities should do is probably come up with a governance system, governance of data, a general, very broad system. For instance, the genetics data of an individual, to what extent the existence of mutations in a person's genome, to what extent can they be made available to my GP? We're far from that. But these are governance issues concerning information, and this is something that we have to take on board. It's part and parcel of this a digital revolution we're trying to organize. So how can we reconcile the necessary protection of data and the wealth of the data market, which is so broad? So we're having this debate on data. Is it not because we want to give more responsibility to users? You know, web surfers are private individuals, they're consumers, and they must decide to what extent they want to disclose their private life online. Should we not use the self-regulation by web surfers to organize this? I think it's part of this schizophrenia I referred to earlier. You know, young people put everything on social network, and their parents worry. We're not talking about the same people. Parents are extremely worried that the children put pictures of photographs on their friends or themselves in bathing suits. But the younger generation, on the contrary, they do enjoy showing off or showing pictures of their friends, having fun. You know, it's what you see in American series. You name your first name, you know everything about you. It's so obvious that you can get all the information you can get about a person. And then in France, they say, well, no, it's not possible. Of course, open data, but you could put the success rate of all colleges. You know, it was blocked. We were not authorized to do this. Or again, the rate of misdemeanor per college or high school. You know, this is a special situation we have in France. Different culture. There's a difference between common law countries and Roman or civil law countries. You know, Anglo-Saxon common law people say everything is authorized unless they appear on the list of some things that are prohibited. And we have the opposite system. Now, on protection of consumer protection, are we not being extra cautious? Well, the specificity of Europe is to consider that data is not just something that happens between a consumer and a supplier. It's not this one-on-one situation, kind of an economic or trade-off. I, consumer, wants need a service, and I'm supplier, so I'm going to provide the right type of service on the basis of this data. In Europe, we consider data goes beyond this. It's one of the basic rights of a person. Of course, data concern individual data, but also it has to do with the life of a community, a certain vision that we have of mankind. We're not just the sum total of individual data. We're more than this. So we could decide that we go for a different model. We go for a different philosophical model, and I think that we'd stand to lose a lot by shifting this attitude. But this is our model. This is the model we go by. So I'm very surprised. You know, people ask, how far are you ready to go? To what extent can you give up on your private or personal data in order to get a better service? It's a bit short-sighted, is it not? It's as if you were telling me, how much are you ready to pay for safety or security, because there's a collective element to it. The universe, the legal framework, public powers, public authorities, all of them are in charge of safety. And they're also in charge of protecting privacy and private data. So part of regulation has to be on the end user, and the end user will eventually decide. But part of regulation is on the community. It has to be implemented by the different actors in the life of a society. Okay, so you're referring to European directives, which are being implemented in each European countries. Are you aware of the economic consequences of the European regulation? Yes, this is very much at the core of our thinking process. We're not saying that rules and regulation change. It has to become more straightforward, streamlined. You were referring to the reports you're supposed to send to CNIL. There won't be any more in the future, because this is not the right approach. This is not a way to regulate the digital environment. The only way we can regulate the digital environment is by making them ready to comply. So they won't be, this reporting system will disappear. This authorization or prior notice, all this is going to be made much simpler, because businesses don't want to add this administrative workload on their own shoulders. And we have to meet them halfway. And we'll build a regulation or regulatory system where you businesses will do your side of the bargain too, because it's a good thing for you in terms of risk management. And we, on our side, are going to make the whole system simpler and more transparent. So let's see how the audience reacts. What about the social networks? Hashtag is going up. One of the remarks, you referred to the steel industry during the first roundtable. Now we're moving on to the oil industry. As to questions, we're getting many answers, many reactions to the kind of a golden mean that we referred to. Someone mentioned that we haven't discussed the safety of data. So here again, you said that you need safer data, you need more individual protection, more global community protection as well. On data safety, probably we're going to open up the debate on the cloud. So data, Well, it's something to do with the value that you put in the data you need to protect. I think data safety or security. Of course, data is at the core of economic models. Of course, if you're not confident as to the use made of your data, of course, it's a huge risk for business. Look at Sony, video game industry, 75,000 accounts or the money that they're not getting. You see, clearly, if economic activity is dependent on data, protection of data becomes a reasonable investment, indispensable investment. I'm not talking about personal data. So, of course, it's very important. So, cloud. We've given a lot of thought to the cloud, which is the alpha and omega of the digital environment. I was reading a story which said that by 2016, more than half of the digital content will be on the cloud. Not expensive, it's flexible, but you don't know where the data is located, and always. So for us, regulators, we think that for certain types of data, there might be a risk there. Too much of a risk. Health data, financial data, industrial security. I don't know where the data is. François and Margot, do you know where the consumers' data is stored? No, but for knowing what the data is, I think the merchant side are not really concerned about this. They don't care. The only thing they want to know is whether the company is sound enough to be trusted. Margot, they are stored in the N of Romain HomeGo. We work with companies that see to it that our data is protected. You referred to personal data extensively. So it's kind of something that geeks like to discuss. Look at the French society where people are interested in access to information rather than to data, figures. Now, you know, it's not really useful. Excel table is nothing you can't really use unless you know exactly what use you want to what purpose you want to use this data. That's the only way you can create added value. So security must be tackled very quickly. Questions in the room. Benoit, if I can ask a question. Fossil energy, you referred to fossil energy or oil, as you said. I have a question concerning the public policy. You know, data is being collected. How would you say that politicians will be able to reverse trends? I'm referring to home and go. You say, well, this is a trendy part of the town, but suppose policymakers or politicians want to reverse a trend. For instance, they want to have more mixed environments in a particular part of the city, but at some point all data show that, no, in this district you can only have this type of people. So people decided not to go there, not to move there for that reason. How can you public a policy on the basis of a decision? How can they revert a trend? In other words, how can you use information to steer the course of a policy? I'd like to go back one step. Before you can use information to steer a policy, you have to make sure that you have the available information. I mean, specific, precise detail, accurate collection of data. If you want the collection data to be tools in the hand of public authorities, you have to make sure that they know how to use it and to collect it. which requires adequate training. And this is what our departments, ministries are doing. But this is going to become a crucial issue, part and parcel of the policy design, public policy, and this is probably what you were referring to. Now I see another challenge there. So let me go back to what open data is in general. Implies a trust between business individuals and also between the individuals in the administration. Open data gives you the raw data, makes it possible to home and consumer actors to use them to provide information to the public, and also trust that the central or local government puts in business actors. Concept goes like this. We have a platform of data made available to the whole civil society, business, individual, and on that basis, you would not trust in those people to invent usages that we were not able or supposed to invent.
Google is gathering us here under the tent, with a big tent. But you see the importance of that ecosystem, structuring a partnership ecosystem to help public policy, develop a sustainable opening of public data, and build human beings access of all this public data. And encouraging the requests and demands is essential. We've gathered more than 30 partners with the industry, among which Google, who look into the in-depth transformation of their industry as brought by the digital, SNCF, the railway, the post, many, many others. We have with these partners investors, investment funds, competitiveness circles, research institutions, and they all gathered to select from among the startups and projects available in France and reutilizing public data to enable sustainable development a long time. I was reacting to Home and Go in the presentation that opened this panel. Home and Go is one of the startups which, among the very first issue of data connection, was in the list. And again, this is an initiative that is carried forward. You mentioned the French culture, which sometimes can be different from what we see in the Anglo-Saxon world, but the government is more than determined to conduct this open data work, and our next step in opening this open data system will be open data connection early February. Romain, Isabelle FALQUE-PIERROTIN wanted to react. Yes. On the question raised by the gentleman. Data do not represent a public policy. Well, it's a public policy when opening the data, but it's a tool at the service of public policy. And I, for one, believe that my concern on this topic and on others is that very often we make a confusion between the tool and the purpose. You should not have this shower of data, more and more precise data analysis system, replacing the orientation that public authorities may have or have not on a topic. You should not have data supervising us, algorithm guiding us. And we see that trend consisting in pushing more and more on data and on algorithm the decision-making process towards this. Sorry to say, there's a more general type of thinking than what we are gathered here today. But what I would like to say, be careful in positioning the tools as tools and not as objectives per se. And as public authority, as company, we have our responsibilities to define objectives. Let us not leave them in the hands of a number of technologies. Well, in the discussion, let me say, and the Anglo-Saxon world is fact-based. They start from facts. Concrete examples. If we have figures on, social mixity of a suburb, you cannot say, well, this is the difficulty of the social environment of that job. And this is where open data can very well change many, many things. If we realize that people would rather take their car than taking mass transportation, we have figures. And it may go against some of the thinking process we have in other countries, in other places. Thank you very much. We have a break, which is a lunch break, so that you can meet startups of the camping area. To us from these two first panels. And purpose and trust. Yes, we knew. Maybe we did not discuss enough the way to give more trust to the consumers. So we'll see you again this afternoon for two other panel sessions, a Big 10. Digitalization of the cultural content, and the last panel will be how can France and European countries develop their own digital attractiveness. Startups who select the country and the city to really impose their policy. Thank you very much. See you this afternoon for the follow-up of Big Tent.